This is Artifact 5 Mobile App Evaluation. This is for Standard 2.3 ISTE Criterion 7. This hits ISTE 2C, Model for Colleagues the Identification, Exploration, Evaluation, Curation, and Adoption of New Digital Resources and Tools for Learning. The goal for this is really to model and show teachers and colleagues how to evaluate online resources and digital tools for mobile learning. For this artifact, I'm going to talk about my iTech 7430 digital tools blog for mobile learning. This blog post is located on my Weebly portfolio, and it goes through and talks about first what mobile learning is, and then it talks about how to manage mobile learning and 10 engaging ways to use mobile devices and mobile learning in your classroom. So here you can see my blog for mobile learning. And this is the screenshot that I showed you at first, but I'm going to go through a little bit. In order to share with my students, and my colleagues, a great way to do that is with Nearpod. Nearpod you can create interactive activities for professional development, or even just for teachers to work through and see how you can use mobile learning in your classrooms with implementation strategies for the different mobile learning devices and softwares. Nearpod is great for interactive activities, instructional lessons. Also, formative assessments are great. But this Nearpod lesson I created here, and I'm going to take you through kind of what I did with my colleagues at my school. So this Nearpod here, I went through with my colleagues and really talked about kind of what mobile learning is and had them interact with this. We talked then about different apps that can be used in your classroom for mobile learning. And I went through, and here you can see I did a poll with them of which one they've used most in their classroom to kind of get a feel of if there's been experiences with a certain type of program or others. But we talk about the benefits and disadvantages. And then here is where we talk about how you can use it in your classroom that I talked about with my colleagues. So the first one we talked about was with Padlet. I shared what Padlet was, but then I also shared implementation strategies using a specific standard. Since this was a Padlet, I did allow my colleagues, I went over this with them as a group, but I also allowed them to do self-paced as well later, because there's a great tutorial on Padlet that I put for them as a resource. So then we talked about Jamboard. I discussed what Jamboard was, but the important part was to actually show them how to implement it in their classroom. So right here we use an ELA standard about compare and contrast two or more characteristics, settings, or events in a story. And we talked about how they could use a mobile or a Venn diagram in Jamboard and have students kind of put their sticky note where it was. I also put a tutorial for them on how to use Google Jamboard. The last one that we talked about was Adobe Express, and then we went through the implementation strategy. This one I focused on a social studies standard with describe the importance of key people, events, and developments between 1950 and 1975. And there was a bunch of different events and people that in 5th grade the students had to know. So we talked about ways to implement that into their classroom. I then put a tutorial, as you can see here, about how to use Adobe Express in many different ways. But then we talked about it of how to use it as presentation model and how students could create their own artifact. This blog post also goes through each software and like Padlet, and I go through and show how they could use Padlet implemented in their classroom and give them some strategies, or Jamboard and give them some strategies, and Adobe Express with some strategies of how to implement. But the important part that I went over with them is the evaluation tool of really understanding, is this piece of technology or digital tool going to have a positive benefit in my classroom that will impact student learning and enhance it. So for this goal, for this standard, it is very important for teachers to understand how to implement these online digital sources for learning, but it's also important to show them how to evaluate the digital piece or the digital technology to make sure that it is appropriate for the standard you are wanting to do or the assignment that is you're wanting your students to complete, as well as making sure to answer that question. Will this provide the learning opportunities that I am expecting for my students that will enhance and extend their learning?